Welcome to our live event today. We're kicking off our Sustainable Stitches series, and we're having some fun using up the things that we already have, being very good stewards of our fabrics, our fibers, batting, everything that we have collected in our studios. And we're going to make a really fun project today. We are going to be working on the Lucky Leaf Hot Pad. My name is Colleen Tauke, and I'll be your instructor today. If you're watching and maybe you're a new watcher to our platforms, maybe you're a returner, come in and pop in at the bottom and tell where you're watching from. We love to see our very faithful watchers, and we love it when you're new and you're joining us. So let us know where you're joining from. The pattern or the QR code is at the bottom of the screen there today. So you can, if you haven't already downloaded the pattern, you can do that after the show if you'd like, so that you can maybe take notes and really just enjoy the process here today. We are going to be, in this example anyway, I was using a bunch of the batik fabrics that I have in my stash of fabrics. But you can use any genre of fabric that you prefer. Maybe you're a collector of those fall prints that you just can't leave in the quilt shops or in the big box store, or you've seen them online and said, oh, I really love these fabrics. And you've used them once maybe already, but you have scraps that you just could not part with. Those are the pieces that we want you to dig out from your stash, because we're just going to use some very narrow pieces. It might be leftover binding, possibly. It might be leftover from piecing, but we can get pieces out of that to use for our lucky leaf. So the pattern will give you a large picture so you can kind of tell how I coordinated my colors, but it's totally up to you and random on how I put my colors together. Becky says, hello, watching from Carmel, Indiana, and Anja is watching from the Netherlands. Wonderful. Let you know that our sponsor for today's live is Sulky. Sulky is a producer of some wonderful fiber threads out there. Threads that we use for piecing, threads that we can use for quilting, and threads that we can use for embellishment. They sent me a really fun selection of fabrics here that you could use for quilting, you could use for doing some embroidery possibly. Look at their selections and see what you think, because I think you're going to be tempted to go in and use the code that they're going to give you for 35% off on their threads through September 27th at midnight Pacific time. 35% off is a really great deal. We don't find that kind of percentage deal on things that we use in the quilt world. Very rarely. Quilt shops once in a while have sales, but not very often. Sometimes online shops will too, but 35% off is a really great value for you to go in and pick up some of the piecing thread, maybe some pre-wound bobbins, some types of threads that you might like to do slow stitch for hand quilting, or you might want to use for embellishment. So take a look at what Sulky has for you on their website too. Okay, so in the pattern, we are going to be cutting a bunch of strips, and you might already have some already cut up, but they might be a little on the wide side. We're going to go down kind of small. Of course, I have leftover pieces of just about everything under the sun. So in trying to decide what I was going to use, I just started pulling out the smaller pieces in my batik bin, because that's how I kind of sorted my fabric. Batiks are in, well, 2 bins. I have to be totally honest. They don't fit into 1 bin. Pull out the smaller pieces so I could cut strips off of those. And as I stack them up and press them, then I can cut down through 4 or 5 layers. Make sure you have a good sharp blade in your rotary cutter, but you can cut 4 or 5 strips off really quickly and try to produce spaghetti for this project. We have Renee saying good morning from Minnesota. We are glad you're here. That's my neighbor to the north. So pick your genre, get out the smaller pieces, start stacking them up at your pressing surface, get them nice and neatly stacked, and then you can easily transfer those to your cutting mat, and you can start doing a little bit of spaghetti production. So these are the leftover strips. I got a little zealous in the cutting portion, and I probably have enough to do a second, which is going to be our demo today. So no matter what the size on the length, you're going to be using some of those really small pieces on one end, and they're going to gradually get a little longer, and then they're going to go back shorter again. So don't count out the small pieces. Keep those in there because you actually might be using those. So make yourself a pile of spaghetti, and then we're going to prepare the base that we're going to quilt as you go production. That's the fun part. We don't have to go back and do a lot of machine quilting on this. We're going to quilt as you go in the process here. So in the pattern, I forgot to mention, is a template at the very back. You're going to find a page that looks like this, and it has half a shape of the leaf on there. This is the fold line. So that means that you're going to take your fabric, and the pieces you're going to cut from that template are varied here. We're going to cut some for the back. We're going to make this really fun pocket on the back, but we're going to also use that template to cut out our shape when we're done here. So the template's really important. You might want to actually make 2 copies of that page so you can cut one out and use it and reserve the other for later. So you don't have to, sometimes it's easier to keep the pattern together if the template page is all connected and stapled together or in a binder together. So in your yardage, I had you get about 1/3 of a yard of fabric for your backing and pocket sections. And in order to cut this out, you're going to fold your fabric. This is the selvage right along here. That's that finished edge that doesn't fray. We're going to fold it down, and you can kind of manipulate this depending on if you're using scraps, possibly too. But you're going to then place, and I'm just going to fold this. So instead of trying to cut it out on camera, which I don't think you really want to see me just cut out half of the leaf, we're going to put that fold line on the fold of our fabric, and making sure that we fold it over far enough so this shape, when it opens up, it's just like when you were a kid and you were making snowflakes. When it opens up, it's the full shape that you need. And I have some already pre-cut. So let me bring those in. And I've kind of pinned them together so I would keep track of everything. You're going to have 3 shapes that look like this. And you're going to set those aside because those are going to be your backing and your pocket. So set those aside for now. You're going to cut out 2 half shapes of batting also that are this shape. But this time they need to be half of a leaf. Half is going to go under one side of the pocket. Half is going to go on the other. It's always best to kind of prepare our pieces so that when we get to that portion, all we have to do is pick them up and just keep moving along in the assembly process. Renee says, good morning. I guess I did get a Renee in there already. I'm sorry. Just don't want to miss anybody who's popped in to share time with us. To me, it's very important that I acknowledge everyone who takes the time to watch. So, okay. The other thing that I am going to be using is some basting spray. Now, Sulky just happens to produce the one that I like the best. Nope. This was not just sent to me and I say, oh, I like it. Oh, no, I've been using this product for probably 20 years. Ever since I started, this is the one that I have liked the best. I've tried others, went back to this one. So Sulky KK2000 is a product that they also produce that I like to use as a basting spray to hold layers together when I get to machine quilting. Or in this case, I am going to be using it to put my batting layers together so that I can build my leaf on top of the batting. But, you know, when it says sustainable stitches, we're literally going to be using up things. So you can see that bright red stitching down the center of my batting? It's 2 narrow strips put together. I hate to throw batting away. After I trim off of a quilt, Usually I have 4 or 5 inches around the perimeter. That's usually what we're, as quilters, what we use just to make sure that it doesn't shift one way or the other and that we have enough to finish our quilting our project. And instead of throwing all those trimmings away, I have a bin for the smaller things. And then when it comes to something like this, I will just make sure that I get a nice straight edge. I do trim to make sure I have 2 straight edges that I'm putting together and then zigzag down the middle to hold those together. We're going to put them in something small like this. And there's no reason that you couldn't just simply piece together enough batting to go inside. It won't shift when we're done because we're going to be stitching through it many, many times. So Mary says hello from chilly Brainerd, Minnesota. Yes, that's way up there north. And it is definitely turned to fall overnight. Minnie says hello from Lovettsville, Virginia. And Melanie says good morning from Coggin Station, Pennsylvania. Wonderful. We are glad that you're joining us. We also have Victoria, who is 1 inch too narrow. 1 inch. Well, if we're, I'm not sure if you're speaking about the fabric strips or the batting pieces within 1 inch. If it's batting strips that are 1 inch, those go in the wastebasket. That's too small. I'm not going to spend that much time putting them together. But when they're 4 or 5 inches and I can put 2 together to get inside of a hot pad or maybe inside of a mug mat or a coaster, I keep those. So that's the size I would go down to, not much less than maybe 3 or 4 inches. Let's see. We also have Debbie saying good morning from sunny Lovitz Park, Illinois. Let's see. Rachel says good evening, watching from Australia. It's 1 a.m. here. Oh dear. Can you not sleep? 1 a.m. Well, I'll keep you company until you get groggy enough to go to sleep. Australia is on a totally different timeline. I could have been awake with you at 1 a.m. this morning, but it would have been daytime for you. So I guess that we're on opposite clocks. Some days you sleep better than others. Okay, we're going to use in this project about an 8-inch square of batting. If it's a little bigger, that's fine. We're going to be trimming at some point. But I've got 2 layers of regular batting. And then I have a layer of Insulbrite. You can hear it crunch a little. It has that metallic layer inside. If you don't have access to that, use 3 layers of batting. Less than 3 layers always makes me a little bit nervous. In my kitchen, I have to move from the oven to the counter behind me, and 2 layers doesn't give me enough time to move with that pan. And I like to have enough time to move and not get hot through that surface. So at least 2 layers, probably 3 for safety's sake. Okay, so 3 layers. If you don't have the Insulbrite, just use 3 layers of your regular cotton batting or cotton combination, because most of mine is a blend, because that's what I use for my batting. We have somebody saying hello from the Big Island. Liko Lelanai. I can't pronounce her name. I'm sorry. But Hawaii is watching. That's absolutely fabulous. Okay. I have gotten my pieces stacked together here. Just a little bit of basting spray will keep these layers from shifting so that as I put them under the machine, everything stays in place. This is fairly small, so it takes just a little bit. It makes your fabric or your batting kind of like a Post-it note so that it's tacky, so it doesn't shift around when we're working. The other thing we need is a square, about a 2-inch square. We're going to start up here at the tip, and it ends up looking kind of like a jewel shape, but I wasn't going to give you a template to try and cut that. We can start with a square and then we'll adapt as we go along. So we need our spaghetti, a square of fabric, and then we need to mark a diagonal line across our base here so that we can kind of keep aligned for the vein, that kind of imaginary vein that goes down through our hot pad. So chalk liner, a fabric marking tool, whatever you can use that will show up on your batting. Now this one's yellow, so it's going to be a little bit tough maybe for you to see, but it disappears nicely when you stitch over it. Oh, you can see it. If you mark enough, you can see the yellow. Perfect. I've used this in blue. I've used it in pink. The pink is a little harder to wash out, but this is going to be the inside, so it won't matter. But something so you have a general diagonal line. I tried to just do a fold and crease, but it wasn't quite visible for me enough under the sewing machine. So I kind of had a wobble in my center when I had to start over again. So give yourself that general direction. And that will get you started. We're going to put that 2-inch square over one of the corners. It doesn't matter which side, over one corner where the diagonal line is going into. So we're going to place that up here. Now, if your fabric has a right or wrong side, you need that right side up. Since I'm working with batiks, there's really not a right or wrong side when it comes to pieces this narrow. We did cut all of our strips at, I have to double check, 1 inch, I believe. Yep, all 1-inch strips. So at that point, you really can't tell right or wrong on batiks. If you're using printed fabric, just be aware of that. So we're putting our first piece in there. Now I'm going to go looking for one of my short little guys that I have in here that I want to use. And since I started with a brown, let's go with something a little brighter for the first strip on there, so that you can see it really well. Let's use, I like this. We're going to use this really fun pink and coral piece. Okay. In the directions, there are photographs. I took pictures as I went along because it was harder. It was hard to use words to describe the placement. So on this very, very first piece that you're going to add, we're going to put them right sides together if you can tell the difference in your fabrics. And we're going to offset these. These are not going to be lined up perfectly. We're going to have the strip a little bit tilted off. We're going to have like a wedge of that square fabric showing, but we're going to use this strip as our guide for your 1/4-inch seam. Now, working on something like this, 1/4-inch seam, close counts. Remember, this is not as vital that your 1/4-inch is absolutely perfect. So we're going to go in and we're going to put in our first strip and use that strip. Oops, got caught on my foot there just a little bit. Okay, we're going to use the edge of the strip as a notation for our 1/4-inch seam allowance. And then I'll take this out and I'll show you how that. And because we're going down through layers, it's going to kind of pull down where we're stitching and it's going to look quilted right away. Okay. So our first piece is on there. You can kind of see there's where I followed along the straight edge of my strip. My square is exposed a little there. So that's kind of a wedge. I have Pippa saying good morning from France. Angel's from Yonkers, New York. Pat saying good afternoon from the UK. Mary's popping in from Peru. Wow, we are international today. I love this. Okay, we're going to take that first strip that we added and push it out toward the batting so that it exposes the right side of the fabric. And then we're going to take our scissors and we're going to trim away the excess fabric. This might be for in another project, depending on how many of these you want to make. Just throw it back in the spaghetti pile. Now we're going to do the other side. Let's this time do a bright yellow. And we only need a piece. So I'm going to just kind of generally overcut a piece. Remember, these are scraps and small pieces. So keeping that diagonal line in mind, you want kind of the overlap of your pieces coming together in that V down through it. Does not have to be perfect. Close will count. Again, I'm going to offset this piece with that wedge shape again and stitch this one in place. This is the only time I'm going to have you working kind of not a non-alignment, I guess is how I should say it. We're only using the straight edge of that strip to use as our guide for our seam allowance. Now, we're going to, again, open this out toward the batting so that we create our V to begin. And now I bet most of you know where we're going. We are going to use these straight edges now, aligning our spaghetti strips along this, going back and forth and back and forth. But remember, you're alternating as you add strips. So we started, for some reason, I went to the right and then to the left. Now we're back to the right. So we're going to add our next strip, right sides together, but this time, remember, we're aligning the pieces. The cut edges here are going to be aligned, and that's where our 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to be. So they can extend off the edge of the batting just a tiny bit. Remember that we're going to be trimming our finished piece into the shape we need. I thought about trying to cut it beforehand, but it just seemed easier, neater when we got done if we left it large first and then trimmed afterwards. Sometimes people say, well, can't we do this step first? And I'm like, well, you could, but I tried it and it's just messy. So this seems to work the best. Okay, got our next piece. It's aligned. You can see on the back, now my stitching lines are going to be parallel as we work our way down on the leaf shape. Again, fold it outward. Make sure that when you cut your piece, leave them maybe a little bit long, so the next piece coming across, make sure it clips it. So next, let's do green. We haven't done green yet. It's kind of playing with the crayon box. When I was working on this, I really wasn't thinking about, oh, what color should I use? I was just picking up, saying, oh, I've got dark, I need a light. So there's my whole suggestion to you, or help for you, is just pick a value that's very different than the last. So we used yellow. I'm going to go brighter into the green, and we'll add to the other side. And this is also a really great place where if you have a lot of odd color threads that you haven't used up or just very little left, this is all on the inside. This doesn't have to be a black thread. It doesn't. You could be using red and no one would know the difference. You can use up the end of those spools that are sitting around and you're thinking, there's not enough to quilt my next project with. Use those up and then go buy some thread from Sulky because they've got that great deal going on. So next, let's do a light purple. We get a light, a dark, and I go back to a light on the other side. And we just keep progressing until we have filled the entire surface. Now, when we were talking about the lengths of the pieces, they get longer, kind of longer, but at one point, they start to get shorter again, and they won't overlap. And I'll show you that. We'll focus on that here in a second. Okay, whoops, cut the thread. If you're new to quilting, there's no need to back stitch. Just go ahead and stitch forward. We're using a little bit shorter stitch length at about a 2.0. Here's where if you leave this a little long and you stitched across, now you can trim that little tail off if you'd like. And then open up your last piece you stitched to cover. And you can see we're creating that V effect that goes down kind of like the spine of the leaf. I think my husband, who's a forester, might object to my great leaf anatomy terminology, but as it goes down, we're going to make that V through the center of the leaf. And this is where I said all the spaghetti comes really in handy. And like I said, don't throw away. You may be making another one. Maybe you want to mass produce these. Maybe you want to make these as stocking stuffers or for gifts for your quilt guild. You could set up a whole section of these, make a very large pot of spaghetti, and just start sewing. And you could be listening to a podcast or a TV show, your favorite series, and just sewing, matching up with that cut edge all the way till you cover out. At some point, when you get out, no, go this direction. As we flip and stitch, you see that it quits overlapping here, and you just have straight pieces on the edge. Just go until you cover all the way to the bottom and then cover those outer corners. So as you get down through here, you're going to get down to the bottom and there's just straight edges, straight pieces you're going to add, but cover this up, okay? When you're done covering the whole entire surface, this is when we're going to come in and we're going to cut this down to the shape that we need for our hot pad. Let's see. LB says, is the batting directional, meaning does it have one stitch or stretchy side? Batting, how should I say this? Doesn't really have a directionality, but there are different kinds. So some batting has no scrim, which means it's fibers that are just bonded kind of together, but if you pull on it, it will distort. Others have a scrim, which means that there's a bonding agent to the back side of the batting, and that should always be on the reverse side. If you look at batting, I was talking about batting with someone recently, and they said there's a right and a wrong side to batting, and I'm like, oh yes, there is. There's a way that it's felted together. So when you look at batting, one side kind of has little like little dimples. It looks like there's little needle pokes down through it. That's the right side. If you flip it over and you feel it very gently, this kind of pebbly on the back. And that is sometimes I say that's the dimple is the top, the pimple is the bottom. So if it has those little nubby feels on the back or on the bottom, that's the bottom of the batting. So always put the dimples up, okay? And those are a little bit more, ones with scrim, that bonding agent helps it not distort as easily. You want to use a batting without scrim for hand quilting. It makes the needle slide through more easily. Batting with scrim is for machine quilting. How do I know? I've done it wrong. Trying to hand quilt through scrim is very difficult. In this project, you can use either one. So that's why using up the things we have is so important here. Nilda says, great demo, pretty quilts on the wall, beautiful art quilt, leaf quilt. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. This was just a brainchild one day. I was thinking, I have so many batiks. What can I do? And I thought, I don't want to just use one or two. I got to use as many as possible. So that's where this came from. Angel says, hello from MS. I believe that's Mississippi. I hope. I really need this video. Good. I'm glad you find it helpful. Okay. Once you have your batting all covered, you're going to take that template shape that you have for the leaf, and you're going to lay it on top, and you're going to, let's see, I think the easiest visual here for me is that we're going to pretend this is our paper. Laying it on top of the leaf, your paper template, you want to put it where it says fold and kind of align it over the top of that V, or that diagonal that we created. It may not be perfect, but every leaf is original. So there is no right or wrong on this. Just get it somewhat toward the center. It may wobble back and forth. That's okay. So what you're doing is you're laying it on there, and that way you can go and cut it out or trace around it so that you can cut it out. So if I did it like this on white, because if I put white paper on here, you're not going to see it. Here you can see, I would go ahead and trace around that using a fabric marking tool or whatever it takes to transfer that line on the outside. And then you can go, there's kind of two approaches. You can just go ahead and cut it out, or you can take it to the machine and stitch right on that marked line, kind of compressing that outer edge. It'll hold everything in place, especially when you get out to these little bars out here. They're going to want to pop up. So if you just mark your shape and then go in and stitch right along that marked line, that way you've got a really good hold on all of your bias edges that are on the outer edge. Then you can trim away the excess and you'll have a nice little leaf shape. And once you have that done, then it's on to creating the back and the pocket portion of our project. So we are going to be using then those 3 shapes that we cut out of our backing fabric. I chose kind of a multicolor on black or charcoal to kind of coordinate with all the colors in my project. So we have one piece that's all by itself. That is going to be the very back of our project. And then we're going to create the pockets that go on there. So kind of imagine this is not here. So where there's our backing, we did all of our quilting through the batting. So we don't need to worry about stitching through. I thought about layering it all up and stitching through the interior portion, but I didn't want to see all those stitching lines. So the inside is just one solid piece of fabric as covering the back. And then I wanted to create those pockets. So the pockets are created by taking one of the leaf shapes, folding it wrong sides together and pressing so that you have a fold. And then taking that half shape of batting, place it inside. And this is where you can hit it with just a little tiny bit of your spray. A little goes a long way. It holds it in place so that it won't shift around. Get it at the half mark. Make sure that's a nice straight line. If you try to scissor cut it, it might be a wobbly line. So you might want to clean that up with a rotary cutter and a ruler so you have a nice straight line there. So you have one side. I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second. Do the same with the second one. And now you have the 2 halves. And literally just a tiny spray. And I'm doing such a light spray here that it really won't, the overspray won't hurt anything. I've really had good luck with the Silky. Whoops, that one, for some reason, I didn't shake it long enough. Here we go. You do have to do a little bit of a shake to get the product to disperse evenly. So shake just a little bit, just light like that. And because I'm putting it down into the area, you don't get that overspray of it going everywhere. And that holds everything in place nicely. Here's where you get to practice a little bit of machine quilting. You can decide how you want to machine quilt. Oh, I got that one already yesterday, I guess. I prepared this one already. Oh, yeah. See how nicely tacky held in place? I left just one for demo there. Now, you can do free motion on this. You can do a decorative stitch. I decided just to be subtle, and I chose my black thread, and I just did simple channel quilting on the back. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but there are channels across there about every ½ inch or so. Just very simple to hold the batting in place as an extra kind of protection for my hands. Then once you have this, and we're going to pretend this is cut out already. Point. You're going to make your sandwich. So the backing for your hot pad, then 1/2 of the pocket, then the other half of the pocket. And in order to keep those really nested up next to each other so they don't walk apart, I went in and did just a little bit of a tack with the sewing machine on each end, and then went back and did kind of a zigzag stitch off the edge, holding all of the layers together, because we're going to want to put binding over this. And if we can compress all those layers a bit, it makes it easier for that binding to be applied, because we've got now 4 layers of batting and 1, 2, 3 layers of, well, 4 layers of fabric. So we've got a lot of layers, and that's why that great versatility in your sewing machine, that zigzag stitch, put it fairly wide, zigzag right off the edge, and just hold everything together on that outer edge so you can work on the binding portion of this. Now, yes, it's a curve. You're going to need to make some bias binding. So in order to make bias binding, we've done some in the past, but just to walk quickly through it, let's see, here we go. Angel says, hello from Mississippi. MS is Mississippi. I did learn something in 4th grade geography. And Linda says, good morning from Northern California. We are glad that you're with us. Okay, the reason why I called for 1/3 of a yard, see the bias over here, this cut? 1/3 of a yard of backing fabric is that way you could easily cut off your binding strips without having to piece too many lengths together. It does specify 3 lengths. It's going to take 3 to get around this project if you're using 1/3 yard of fabric. So you can, let me take the other side and I'll demo real quick cutting because I'll need some binding for this project. So we have a selvage edge or a straight edge here. If you cut off of that, create a new clean cut so that you, well, if you took your leaf shapes off one side, you have your other side for binding. See, that was my method to my craziness there. We're going to cut 45-degree angles off of this. That means that the binding will have some stretch and some give to go around our curve and lay really nicely when we're done. So those rulers have all those angles on them. Find the 45-degree line. I'm going to put it this way so I have a longer edge here. So I have 45-degree line in front of me. We're going to match that up with the selvage edge of our fabric like this. And you can use a longer ruler. The 24-inch long ruler is great for making those long cuts. It just doesn't work really great in a small studio for demo. So I have a 45-degree line there. This is the edge I want to cut on. So I'm making my first cut, and that gives me a true bias edge, which is a 45-degree angle with that give to it. And then in your instructions, I believe it was 2 1/4 inch, double checking my strips for binding. Let's see, 2 1/2. I did 2 1/2 on this one. Sometimes I go back to 2 1/4, but 2 1/2 inch binding. So next, 2 1/2 inches in from the diagonal that you just cut. So 1, 2 1/2. If you need a reminder of where you need to cut, a Post-it note or a sticky of some painter's tape, something to get you to the 2 1/2 inch line. So 1, 2 1/2, and line that up with that diagonal cut you made. And make sure that we can go all the way across. We're starting on the edge here. We'll slide up to do the remaining piece of the cut. So up, then I'm not taking up my blade. I'm just sliding it along, making sure that my 2 1/2 inch line stays under my ruler, and I have a perfect bias cut. Then I will just move up the strip to cut 2 more of those 2 1/2 inch wide strips in order to get 3 to go around this project. Okay, so that's cutting bias strips. The binding that you're preparing is the same process that you would use for your straight of grain strips. Take your bias strips, you're going to link them together, make sure your seam allowances are pressed open nicely. Then wrong sides together, press it in half so that you've got it prepared to go around the curve of your lucky leaf pot holder. Now, the one thing that I did prepare off of this strip was the little loop on here. If you don't want to make the loop, fine, omit it, no problem. If you want to make that, I had you take off a section off of the binding because I included it in the amount you needed. So just double checking here. I had you cut a piece that's 4 1/2 inches long. So 4 1/2 inches, 1, 2, 3, 4 1/2. Take a piece. Exactness isn't so important. Remember, we're having fun here. A 4 1/2 inch piece that we're going to then press again. We're going to take the raw edges to that center fold like this. I don't know if my iron is hot right now, but we're going to open up the piece. There's my fold down the center. Take the outer edges toward the center and fold again so that we have all of our raw edges encased. And that is what's going to make your loop for your pot holder. Now, not everyone wants to put that loop on their pot holder, so you can omit if you'd like. But I did that process and stitched it onto the edge of the pot holder before I applied the binding so that it was stitched in well. There's a little trick to getting it in place. So let me fold this real quick so that, and you're going to want to stitch this on both sides of the folds once you have it assembled. Let me get it pressed here. Once you have it folded together, raw edges to the inside, you're going to stitch close to both of the outer edges there and then fold it over. Thinking about kind of the direction of that loop so it lays nicely. And it is then placed on the back side. Up here where our two pieces come together on the rounded edge of our placement, our hot pad, I laid it here and tacked it in place. So here's my little loop. He's going to lay toward the center. Cut edges are aligned here, and I just take the machine and just stitch that in place, stay stitch it. So within the seam allowance there. And now he can stay there while I go ahead and put my binding on. The binding is applied to the right side and then rolled to the back. So the binding was applied going along. You're going to have fullness, and it's going to look like this. It's going to pop up a little bit as it comes around the corner. Don't pull it straight and flat at this point. It needs fullness to make around that curve. So work your way around. It's okay that it looks bubbly. You're thinking, I did this wrong. It doesn't look nice and neat. But when you roll it to the back side, it will lay down and behave so nicely. You're going to think, it did work. Okay. So once you have it rolled to the back, you can go around, and it's up to you whether you want to stitch in the ditch to tack that down or you want to hand stitch. I tend to be a hand stitcher because I like the way it looks. And then you can flip up the little loop, and I tacked it by machine through the binding here so it would stay in place. So that's how we do the binding and the loop. And now your sustainable stitches lucky leaf is ready to go in the kitchen. Let's see. Could you work with a serger? You can serge that outer edge when you get done creating all of your pieced edges and you have your line drawn around there. Serger would be great to do that stitching and trimming all at once, and you could press that outer edge nicely. So a serger does come in handy. I don't use a serger for a lot of my piecing just because of the accuracy and involved. But if you want to use a serger on that outer edge, wherever a zigzag can be used to compress layers, a serger is a really good idea. Thanks for adding that. Let's see. Do I have any problems sewing through the layers of the batting, like skipped stitches? If you encounter skipped stitches, say that quickly 3 times, just go and put in a larger needle in your machine. Usually the problem is that we use probably an either an 80-12 or a 90-14 needle. Those are kind of the universal size needles that we use when we're doing our piecing. If you encounter issues of skipped stitches, move up to about a 16 or an 18 size needle. The reason you're getting skips is because there's drag on the thread coming up through the fibers. The machine is doing its job, is taking the thread down, but as it pulls up, the fibers around that thread are dragging on it, and it's not letting it do its proper work. So by going to a larger needle, what happens is the needle structure is bigger around, and it seems so slight, but it's just enough to protect the thread, because the front side portion of our needle has kind of a cupped groove in the front of it, and our thread actually goes in there and is protected as it goes up and down through the layers. If it's too small, the thread kind of wants to get, it says, I can't fit. And then there's all this drag on it and it skips a stitch. But if it's a little larger, it makes a bigger hole through the fibers, protects the thread better, and then you should alleviate the skipped stitch. So moving up to either 16 or an 18 needle should fix skipped stitches. Cheryl asks, have you used a product like Soft and Stable in place of the 2 layers of batting? You might be able to. I believe, though, the interior layer of those products is not cotton, and I'm not sure how heat resistant it would be with something coming out of the oven that was extremely hot. We do use our ovens at different temperatures. 350 is kind of, and 325 are really kind of the norm if we're working in Fahrenheit. If you're in Celsius, you're going to have to switch that over. You're probably better at that than me. But there are times when we take things that are of our ovens that are 500 degrees or 475, and that extreme heat may damage the interior layer of that product. So I would check that product to see what its heat resistance kind of limits are before I used it. That's a really good question. Skeeter asked, wonderful tutorial, wonderful project. Thank you. Jamie says, have a great, what a great project. Thanks from Denver, Colorado. Wonderful. We're glad that you are joining us with this project. Melanie asks, do you use a walking foot? I do use a walking foot for larger projects. In this one, I did not use a walking foot. If you have issues with your machine dragging too much and it not feeding through nicely, you may change over to a walking foot. The shift that happens in the layers, usually, I would say in general, happens over a longer distance. And we're working on a very short distance here. So the amount of shift should be very minimal and maybe not as evident in this project. And by using that little bit of basting spray, it does help those layers stay together long enough for you to piece across this, because I did not use a walking foot. My walking foot, and I have a dual feed foot, I have different ones for different machines, work great. It's a little bit harder to see a 1/4 inch seam allowance on some of those feet. If you have a integrated walking foot, maybe then you can easily see where your 1/4 inch is for doing your seaming. But in this project, I did not use mine. So I will be totally honest, I didn't use it in this project. Nancy says, would you please repeat the layering process of the batting and the Insulbright? Okay. Insulbright I put on the bottom because I wanted that reflective layer to be closest to my hand. I want to reflect the heat away. So I've got cotton, Insulbright. Okay. So then that way that heat it might come down through the layers. When it hits the Insulbright last, it can reflect the heat away from my hand. It could go in the middle too. I think it works no matter what. I've used it in a variety of hot pads that are in my kitchen currently. And as long as there's some layer in there to help reflect the heat and enough cotton batting, I like to pair it to kind of give that buffer for my hand. Seems that we're safe in the kitchen. So I did that cotton, and then the Insulbright at the bottom so that the Insulbright is closest to my hand to reflect heat at the last minute. Rita says, can you launder the Insulbright and not ruin it? Yes, it is washable. I should have brought down a hot pad from upstairs. They've been washed a million times. So some of them don't look so pretty anymore. That's why I need some new ones. But yes, it is washable. It is a product that can be laundered. That's why it was created for just this use. Let's see. Cheryl says, this has been a wonderful project. Thank you so much for presenting it. I always enjoy your demos. I appreciate that. It's nice to know that the things that we produce and dream up, actually you find value in that and that you learn a little bit along the way. Remember to stop to use Go and check out Sulky's site at their 35% off on their threads. They have a great selection. I should bring in, if you like to do maybe slow stitch or a decorative stitch or embellishment on your quilts, or even your small projects, I have a selection of, these are all 12 weight. These are really a thick thread that are great for doing embroidery or embellishment. Just look at these colors. You cannot resist. I know, you're just like me. You see all these luscious colors and the variegateds and the tones that you can purchase, and you're going to want to pick up a few and try them out. So this is a collection with a little extra space for me to store some others, but they also have a great selection of shiny threads that we can do for fun embellishment. They have some metallics, I believe, or some glittery ones, some variegated. So check out Sulky's wonderful sale that they're offering you 35% off up until the end of September 27th, midnight Pacific time, so that you have the chance to jump into that sale and find a fun set of threads to use on your next project. So for the sustainable stitches, we're kicking off the Lucky Leaf project. We are glad that you joined us.